It was Rebecca's 45th birthday, the kind of date a mother underlines twice. I woke before dawn and took the bus 2 stops early so I could walk the last block with the cake balanced carefully in my arms. I'd ordered it from her favorite bakery-rich chocolate, layered with fresh strawberries, piped with delicate spirals just the way she liked when she was little. It cost $200, which pinched, of course, but for my only child, nothing ever felt too expensive. I'd even asked them to set the candles in a gentle arc, so all she had to do was make a wish. The morning air had that cool, glassy stillness that makes everything sound louder the click of my sensible heels, the soft thud of the cake box against my cardigan, the steady drum of my own hopeful heart. When her house came into view, handsome, generous, sun-washed brick, I felt that familiar ache of pride. I remembered the day we closed on it, the pen scratching my name across yet another check, the $50,000 I'd pulled from my life savings to help with the down payment. 40 years of double shifts as a nurse coffee gone cold in paper cups, fluorescent lights. The clean bite of antiseptic had turned into something you could touch. My daughter's home. I climbed the steps, smoothed my hair, and knocked with a smile that already belonged to the answer I hoped for. I could see it, her face lighting up like it used to when she was a little girl in our narrow kitchen, cheeks pink from blowing out candles, chocolate icing smudged near her lip. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I rehearsed under my breath, the words warm in my mouth. The door opened. Rebecca stood there in a fall of perfect hair and a sweater the color of expensive cream. Her eyes flicked to the cake, then to me, and something in her face tightened, as if I were a misplaced package on her doorstep, not her mother. "Oh, it's you," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. I swallowed and tried to pour warmth into the space between us. "Happy birthday, my love," I offered, lifting the cake just enough so the silver of the candles caught the light. "Your favorite chocolate with strawberries, just like when you were little." She sighed one of those long, flat sighs that sound like a door closing. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, stepping aside. "No, thank you. No, come in." Just the bare minimum of motion, as if kindness were a resource to ration. Inside, everything was beautiful. The living room looked like a magazine page, soft throws, clean lines, fresh flowers in a glass cylinder. I knew what each object had cost. I'd seen the receipts, carried the bag, said of course more times than I could count. I set the cake on the coffee table and tried not to fuss. The candles were beginning to tilt, the pale wax softening, little threads of smoke ready to form. She sat, legs crossed, hands folded, in a way that made her look like a stranger who wore my daughter's face. I took the edge of the opposite cushion and felt the room tilt slightly with all the words I hoped we would say. "Let's have a slice. Thank you for coming. I'm glad you're here." "You know, Mom," Rebecca began, her tone cool and practiced, "I've been thinking a lot about this birthday, about presents, and about what would truly make me happy." Relief slipped over me like a warm blanket. "Of course," I said, a little too eagerly. "Tell me what you want and I'll get it for you. A trip, some jewelry, maybe that new car you mentioned." She looked me dead in the eye, then really looked, and what I saw there chilled me right through my cardigan. It was not frustration. It wasn't even anger. It was a kind of bright, hard contempt I'd never seen on her before. "The one thing I'd love most as a birthday present," she said slowly, savoring each word the way people savor cake, "is for you to just die." The world contracted to a pinpoint. Somewhere, a candle guttered. I heard my own breath catch, a thin sound, like thread snapping. For a moment, even the house seemed to lean away from me, walls, flowers, the neat stack of coasters, all of it sliding out of reach. "What?" I whispered, though I'd heard her perfectly. "You heard me," she said, voice clean as glass. "I'm tired of you, Mom. Tired of your calls, your unexpected visits. My life would be so much easier if you just disappear." I stared at the cake, $200 of love and memory, and understood, with a clarity that made my hands shake, that this birthday wasn't a celebration. It was a line being drawn. I left Rebecca's house carrying more than the empty air between the screen door and the sidewalk. I carried the cake box candles melting into wax like the last of my illusions, and I carried a loneliness so heavy my legs trembled. I walked home in a kind of fog, replaying her voice again and again, until the words became a relentless drumbeat. "I wish you'd die." 45 years of motherhood condensed into a single sentence and tossed away like a napkin. My small apartment smelled the same as it always had. Faint lemon from the cleaner, the soft musk of old books, the threadbare couch where I'd nursed Rebecca and read her bedtime stories. I sat down and let the cardboard slide from my hands. The cake went straight into the trash. The sight of it, $200 of careful thought, felt obscene now. The candles had melted into wax pools that gleamed like tears. I stared at them until the world blurred. Memory arrived in sheets, unstoppable. I opened the filing box where I kept receipts, statements, little scraps of life I'd saved because I was proud, because each one proved I had given everything. The hospital bills from when Rebecca was 3 and had pneumonia, the antibiotics, that cost $1,200, and for which I'd sold my late mother's jewelry. The pink prom dress that had set her eyes sparkling for $800. The semesters paid out of a second mortgage, $42,000 worth of college tuition, paid because I believed with the stubbornness only a mother knows that education was more important than my comfort. When she married David, I organized the wedding and signed the checks. $35,000 for a ballroom she would always say felt like a fairy tale. Then came the house, the down payment, $150,000 from my life savings, money I had been tucking away for the quiet retirement I'd imagined. I remembered the day I wrote that check with hands that didn't tremble. Don't worry about the down payment. I told them both. I'll take care of it. I believed the look of gratitude on Rebecca's face would last as long as the mortgage. When the twins were born, I became the unpaid babysitter who showed up without complaint. Nights, weekends, emergencies. When David lost his job, I covered the mortgage for 8 months, $16,000 taken from my pension, so the family could have the illusion of stability. When the twins needed braces, $4,000 became mine to give. Little gifts stacked up over the years into a mountain of at least $10,000 in birthdays and holidays. I added the numbers aloud: college, wedding, house, mortgage payments, braces, gifts, and the total blinked back like a verdict. More than $460,000. Nearly $500,000 I had invested in my daughter's life. The arithmetic was a cruel ledger. If I'd let compound interest do its slow, faithful work on that money, instead of spending it on others, I thought, I could have had a retirement of comfort travel, good health care, a house that didn't leak in the rain. I closed my eyes and saw the life that might have been. Train trips across Europe, quiet mornings with toast and coffee on a sunlit terrace, doctor appointments where the cost didn't sting. Instead, I had chosen love raw, uncalculated, impossible to take back. For decades I had believed that love was an accounting of care, that investment returned in hugs and gratitude, and the soft assurance that someone would hold my hand when I was old. How foolish I had been to treat love like a loan. At 3 a.m, I called Rebecca. I needed the truth. The phone buzzed and then connected to the voice I had known since the day she was born. "What do you want now, Mom?" she snapped. Irritation like static. "Did you mean it?" I asked, voice fraying. "Did you mean what you said today?" She answered with the bluntness of someone who had rehearsed her boundaries and discovered satisfaction in their edges. "Of course I meant it. You're suffocating me. I need space. I need a life that isn't your echo." Obsession. That's what she called 45 years of being someone's mother. Obsession, an ugly word, and in her mouth, suddenly a justification. I had no misapprehensions left. Her apology didn't come. Only the cold, practical language of a daughter who decided she was done. Sleep would not come that night. Instead, sadness mutated into something else. It blossomed into clarity and dangerously into a kind of furious, quiet resolve. The image of being discarded ignited a stubborn light under my ribs. If she wanted me gone, perhaps it was time I disappeared, but not as a surrender. Not as an ending born from defeat. I would disappear on my own terms. The next morning I stepped into a life I'd never allowed myself to imagine. I walked into the bank and closed a joint account I'd opened for house emergencies, a little nest egg of $20,000 that had been meant to catch a fall. Signing the withdrawal felt like reclaiming tiny pieces of my life. Then I sat with the mortgage officer and read the fine print that had once felt like a distant legal language. Being otso signet had always felt like responsibility, now it felt like okay. The law, I learned, offered rights as well as obligations. If the primary holders defaulted, the cosigner could petition to reclaim property. I went home clutching copies of documents as if they were talismans. Then I visited my lawyer, Anel, a steady man who had known my husband, who had seen the years I'd sacrificed. I want to change my will, I told him. I want Rebecca out of any beneficiary line. I want to leave everything to the orphanage where I volunteer and set a trust for the grandchildren they can only access at 25. His eyes widened at first, then softened with a kind of professional comprehension. You are hurt, he said carefully, but legally you have solid ground. That night I called a travel agency. I booked a consult for retirees wanting to start over in Switzerland. The idea of mountains that were not the gray steel of the hospital on night shifts, that idea felt like oxygen. My heart hiccuped with a dizzy sense of possibility. A life where decisions were my own again, where my money could be spent on silk scarves and train tickets instead of tuition payments. When Rebecca called later, asking for a favor, "Can you watch the twins this Friday?" I surprised us both. "I can't," I said. The word felt small, almost ridiculous after a lifetime of yes. The silence on the other end of the line was a small, sweet victory. By the end of the week, I had a plan that was equal parts practical and theatrical. I would leave. I would change my legal documents. I would close accounts. I would take back what I could. And when I was gone, if Rebecca truly wanted me to disappear, she would understand what that disappearance cost. The next morning, I packed an envelope with $30,000 in cash, withdrew from accounts I'd let others spend from, and stored it in my safe. I had never felt such a strange mixture of dread and very private exhilaration. For the first time in decades, the choice was mine. By Friday evening, my apartment looked less like a home and more like a stage being quietly dismantled. 2 suitcases leaned against the wall, not yet filled but waiting, as if they knew. On the coffee table sat the beginnings of something more powerful than any confrontation I could have had with Rebecca, a letter. I pulled out the thick stationery I had been saving for special occasions, though nothing about this moment felt celebratory. My hand trembled as I wrote the opening words, but once the pen touched the page, the sentences poured out with the urgency of a flood finally breaking through a dam. "My dear Rebecca," I began, "you once told me that the greatest gift I could give you was to disappear. Tonight, I am choosing to grant you that wish." I wrote through tears, not to curse her, not even to accuse her, but to educate her, to show her the arithmetic of a lifetime. I listed the numbers: the $42,000 in tuition, the $35,000 wedding, the $150,000 down payment, the $16,000 mortgage payments, the $4,000 braces, the countless thousands in gifts and babysitting. I itemized not to shame her, but so that she would see in black and white what my love had cost. Page after page, I detailed the sacrifices she never saw the shifts work through fevers, the dinners skipped, the jewelry pawned, the holidays spent alone so she could celebrate elsewhere. I wanted her to understand that when she asked for my disappearance, she was also asking for the removal of every safety net she had taken for granted. The letter grew thick, 23 pages by the time I finished. Attached were copies of the legal documents I had signed that week, the change to my will, the cancellation of her health insurance I'd been covering, the declaration that as co-signer on her mortgage, I intended to exercise my rights. It was meticulous, clinical almost, but the heart of it was this: your life will be much easier without me, Rebecca, but it will also be much more expensive. I hope you believe it is worth the cost. When I set the pen down, my hand ached, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it into a large envelope, and sealed it with the same determination with which I had once sealed birthday cards full of money. This time, however, there would be no check inside, only truth. That night, Elvira, my neighbor and secret accomplice, came over for tea. She was a wiry woman of 68 with sharp eyes softened by kindness. She listened as I read parts of the letter aloud, nodding with tears glistening in her lashes. "It's brilliant," she whispered. "That ungrateful girl will finally understand what it means to live without you." I reached across the table and took her hands. "Elvira, I need your help. When I leave, I want you to be the one who discovers my apartment empty, who delivers the letter. Rebecca needs to believe, at least for a while, that I am gone for good." Her smile was mischievous but tender. I taught drama for 30 years, Julieta. Believe me, I can play the part. That night, I barely slept, not because of dread, but because of a strange anticipation. For decades, I had been the woman who said yes, who saved, who stayed. Now, for the first time, I was becoming someone else, someone who chose herself. When dawn broke, the letter sat waiting on the table, heavy with everything I had never said aloud. It was not a farewell. It was a reckoning. Saturday morning sunlight spilled through my thin curtains, painting pale rectangles on the carpet. I stared at the packed letter on the table, the envelope thick and heavy like a stone pressing against my chest. My plan was no longer just an idea, it was alive, waiting to unfold. I tried to distract myself with ordinary routines, boiling water for coffee, slicing bread for toast, but my mind kept circling back to Rebecca. Would she even read every page? Would she shrug it off as dramatics? Or would she for once feel the weight of what I had carried for 45 years? As if summoned by my thoughts, the phone rang. Her name flashed across the screen. Rebecca. My first instinct was to let it ring, to preserve the silence I had been craving. But some foolish, aching part of me still hoped that this time her tone would be softer, that maybe she had reconsidered. I answered. "Mom," she said briskly, not even bothering with a greeting, "I need a favor." My heart sank. Of course. Not an apology, not even acknowledgement of her cruelty, just another demand. "What is it?" I asked, steadying my voice. "The twins have a presentation at school on Friday, and David and I have a dinner with his boss. Could you watch them that night?" The irony was so sharp I nearly laughed. The same daughter who had wished for my death as a birthday present now wanted me to babysit as if nothing had happened. "I can't," I replied simply. Silence. Then disbelief. "What do you mean you can't?" "I have other plans," I said. My voice calm but laced with steel I didn't know I still possessed. "What plans could you possibly have?" she shot back, her tone dripping with condescension as though, at 72, my life was meant to be nothing but a waiting room for her convenience. "Plans," I said slowly, "that are none of your business. Find another sitter." Her breath caught on the other end, sharp with irritation. "Mom, I can't get someone on such short notice. Besides, since when do you charge me to watch your own grandchildren?" There it was, the familiar dagger of emotional manipulation, the guilt she had wielded so effectively for years. But this time, it slipped off me like water against stone. "Since you told me," I answered coldly, "that your greatest birthday wish was for me to die. If you want me to disappear from your life, I'm starting now." The silence stretched. Then came a laugh, bitter and sarcastic. "Seriously? You're going to punish me like some spoiled child?" I thought by now the drama would be over. "It isn't drama, Rebecca," I replied. "It's respect for your wish." "Fine," she snapped. "If you want to be childish, that's on you. But don't come running back later when you're lonely." The line went dead. I set the phone down and stared at it, my pulse steady for the first time in years. Every word she spoke only confirmed that I was right. This wasn't about loneliness. It was about liberation. That afternoon, I walked to the bank and withdrew $30,000 in cash. The bills were crisp, neatly banded, and startlingly heavy in the envelope I slid into my safe. For decades, I had watched my savings vanish into Rebecca's needs, my retirement chipped away in the name of her happiness. But now, every dollar in that envelope was mine and mine alone. On the way home, the autumn wind pressed cool against my face, and for the first time in years, I felt a trace of exhilaration. Not joy, not yet, but the first whisper of freedom. Sunday morning arrived with a sky as pale as porcelain, the kind of quiet day that begged for reflection. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee cooling beside me, staring at my 2 suitcases. One was filled with clothes, the other still half empty, waiting for essentials I had yet to decide if I could part with. Every item I chose seemed symbolic. Was I taking it for practicality, or because it tethered me to the woman I had been all these years? Elvira knocked softly around mid-morning, carrying fresh croissants from the bakery down the street. She looked at me with the knowing eyes of a co-conspirator. "Are you ready?" she asked, handing me the warm paper bag. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, and tried to smile. We sat together while I explained the final details of my plan once more, needing her reassurance as much as her help. "On Wednesday, you'll go to Rebecca's house with the letter. You'll tell her you found my apartment empty. No sign of me, just the envelope waiting on the table." Elvira nodded solemnly. "And I'll act worried, of course. I've taught theater for 30 years. It will be my greatest performance." I reached across and squeezed her hand. "She needs to believe I am gone. Only then will she understand what life without me truly costs." That evening, I wrote the last lines of my farewell letter, sealing it inside the envelope with a weight of finality. When I set it down on the table, my hands shook. It wasn't fear, it was the gravity of taking back ownership of a life I had given away, piece by piece, for decades. Monday dawned earlier than my nerves were ready for. At 5 o'clock sharp, Elvira tapped at my door again, this time with coffee in a thermos and a smile that steadied me. "Ready for your great escape?" she teased. "More than ready," I whispered, hauling my 2 suitcases into the hallway. She held up the spare keys I'd given her the night before. "I'll take care of everything. By the time Rebecca realizes what's happening, you'll already be free." At 6 o'clock, a cab pulled up. The driver asked simply, "Airport?" "To the airport," I replied, and the words felt like a declaration, like the opening line of a new story. As the cab rolled through familiar streets, I watched the hospital where I'd worked 4 decades blur past, the park where I'd pushed Rebecca on the swings, the church where I'd stood in white lace to marry her father. Each place waved its silent goodbye. I didn't feel regret. I felt something closer to relief, like a prisoner finally walking out into sunlight. At the airport, my phone buzzed with Rebecca's number. 3 calls, one after another. Then a text. "Mom, you're being ridiculous. The kids are asking for you. Call me." I deleted it without replying. Strange how suddenly she needed me once I was no longer available at her convenience. 12 hours later, my plane touched down in Zurich. A man stood at the gate holding a sign with my name, Klaus, from the travel agency. He welcomed me with a genuine smile, speaking English as though he'd studied it just for me. "Mrs. Johnson, welcome to Switzerland. Are you ready for your new adventure?" I looked at him, then at the lights of the city glowing like a promise against the night sky. For the first time in decades, my smile came easily. "More than ready," I said. Zurich greeted me with a crisp night air that smelled faintly of pine and clean stone, so different from the heavy, familiar humidity of home. Klaus led me to a small furnished apartment in the city center, modest but cozy, with wide windows that opened onto a park where autumn leaves swirled in golden eddies. From one corner of the room, if I leaned just so, I could even catch a glimpse of the lake glimmering beneath the moonlight. "This will be yours for a month while you decide if you'd like to stay permanently," Klaus explained, placing a thick folder on the table. "Inside you'll find information about the city cafes, activities for seniors, German classes, even social groups. And tomorrow afternoon, you'll meet with a financial advisor who can help with paperwork if you choose to remain here long term." I nodded, hardly hearing him, because my chest was already swelling with something I had not felt in years. Possibility. When he left, I stood in the center of that little apartment and let the silence wash over me. No phone ringing, no one knocking on my door to ask for money, childcare, or favors. Just silence, wide and liberating. That night, I slept like a child, the kind of deep, uninterrupted sleep that feels like a gift. In the morning, I woke early, put on my nicest scarf, and walked to the lake. The cafes were just opening. I sat at one with outdoor tables, ordered a breakfast I didn't need, but wanted a flaky croissant, fresh butter, and a steaming cup of coffee strong enough to warm me through. I even bought a bouquet of flowers for the apartment, something frivolous I hadn't done for myself in decades. And then, at a small boutique along the cobblestone street, I saw it, a silk scarf, rich and blue, the color of twilight. It cost $100, a sum that once would have gone to Rebecca's emergencies. But this time, I bought it without hesitation, folding it gently into the bag with trembling hands. For once, the money was mine to spend on joy, not survival. Later, while sitting on a bench by the lake, I did what I had always done, I calculated. In the last 5 years alone, I had spent at least $50,000 on Rebecca and her family. Mortgage payments, braces, endless gifts, gas for babysitting visits, groceries I bought so she wouldn't have to, $50,000 that could have been silk scarves, train tickets, dinners by the water, or simply security for my old age. At 2 o'clock, I met the financial advisor, a dignified older man named Herr Meyer. His office smelled of polished wood and paper. "With your savings and your American pension," he explained, adjusting his glasses, "you can live quite comfortably here for the rest of your life. Switzerland has excellent medical programs for retirees, and if you invest wisely, you could even grow your wealth." Grow my wealth? The word sounded foreign, almost absurd. For so long, my wealth had only ever shrunk, parceled out like crumbs for others. I nodded, my throat tight, because what he was really offering wasn't just stability, it was freedom. That night, back in my apartment, I tied the new scarf around my neck and looked out at the lake. For the first time in 45 years, I was living a life that belonged only to me. By Wednesday morning, the air in Zurich carried the faint chill of oncoming winter. I wrapped myself in my new silk scarf and walked to the lakeside bench I had claimed as my own. The water sparkled with an almost arrogant serenity, and for a moment I felt weightless, as though the past had been nothing more than a shadow I'd finally outrun. But I knew what day it was. Back home, Elvira would be putting my plan into motion. She would call Rebecca, voice laced with worry, and say she hadn't seen me in days. She would describe finding my apartment empty, the envelope on the table. She would hand over the letter that spelled out 45 years of sacrifice and one final act of self-preservation. I sat very still, watching swans cut across the surface of the water, until my phone buzzed violently against the bench. Rebecca. For a long moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity, cruel and irresistible, made me swipe. "Mom!" she cried, her voice frantic, cracking in a way I hadn't heard since she was a child. "Where are you?" "Elvira came over. She gave me this letter. You can't just disappear like this." I closed my eyes, savoring the calm of the lake against the storm in her voice. "Did you read the letter?" I asked. "Yes, I read it. Are you crazy? How could you do this to us?" "To us?" I repeated softly. "Or to you?" "Mom, please. I didn't mean what I said on my birthday. I was angry, stressed. David lost his job again. The kids are driving me mad. I didn't mean it." Her words came fast, desperate but hollow. She sounded less like a daughter pleading for her mother, and more like a tenant arguing with a landlord about overdue rent. "You told me," I said evenly, "that your greatest wish was for me to die. That is not something one says by accident." On the other end, her breathing hitched. "I was frustrated. You know I didn't mean it literally. Please, Mom, we need you. I need you." "Do you need me?" I asked quietly. "Or do you need my money?" Silence. A silence that stretched until it became its own kind of confession. Finally, her voice returned, small, unconvincing. "I need you." "No," I said, watching the Swiss mountains in the distance. "What you need is someone to rescue you, to fix every mistake, to carry every burden, and that person can no longer be me." "Mom, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't do this. The kids, they're asking about you. They don't understand why you're gone." My throat tightened, but I steadied it with the truth. "The children will learn something important, Rebecca. That words have consequences. That cruelty cannot be taken back with a single apology. And that when you tell someone you wish they were dead, sometimes they might just grant your wish." She sobbed into the phone, but I let her tears wash over silence. My hand hovered for a moment, then pressed the red button. The call ended, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel the need to call back. That night, I went out to dinner alone at an elegant restaurant overlooking the lake. I ordered salmon with caviar, $80 for a single plate, and a full bottle of French wine. Each bite tasted like defiance, each sip like freedom. For decades, I had denied myself the smallest indulgence so Rebecca could have more. Tonight, I tasted what it meant to live for me, and it was exquisite. The next morning, Thursday, I awoke to the chiming of my phone. At first, I thought it might be Elvira with an update, but when I glanced at the screen, my heart sank. 47 missed calls. Nearly 24 unread messages blinked at me, every single one from Rebecca or David. I brewed my coffee slowly, deliberately ignoring the phone, but the curiosity gnawed at me. After breakfast, I sat at the table, opened the inbox, and scrolled through the frantic trail of words. The first messages had the tone of worry. "Please, Mom, answer. We're so worried." Then came the warnings. If you don't call us back, we'll contact the police. By the 10th, the threats had sharpened. We already called them. They said they can't do anything because you left a letter. But this is ridiculous. Come back right now. By the 15th, the truth began to ooze through the cracks. The bank called. You canceled the joint account. How are we supposed to pay for emergencies? By the 20th, the masks were gone altogether. You can't do this. You'll ruin us. The mortgage lawyer says you could even take the house. Do you want to see us homeless? I leaned back, exhaling a bitter laugh. How quickly their concern for my health had shifted into panic about money. It was like peeling an onion, layer by layer, until only the sharp sting of self-interest remained. I typed a single message in response. I am fine. I am exactly where I need to be. Do not look for me. The reply came in less than 5 minutes. Rebecca's desperation practically leaping from the screen. You don't understand what you're doing. You'll destroy us. Please, Mom, just come back. We'll talk. We'll fix this. Fix this. The phrase rang in my head like a cracked bell. Not apologize, not make amends, but fix this. As if I were a wrench in her hand, a tool to mend the life she had built on my sacrifices. That afternoon, I met with Herr Meyer, the financial advisor. His office smelled faintly of leather and old wood polish, reassuring in its solidity. He spoke calmly, with a precision that soothed me. Mrs. Johnson, with your current assets and pension, you can sustain yourself comfortably here. If you invest wisely, you could even double your savings in 5 years. Double. The word was almost painful. How many times had I let my savings evaporate into Rebecca's emergencies, convincing myself love meant sacrifice, not stability? Herr Meyer leaned forward. I must tell you, you are not the first mother who has come here under such circumstances. Many women your age arrive in Switzerland after realizing their adult children see them as little more than a wallet. You are not alone. Tears pricked my eyes, but not from sorrow, from relief. For the first time, someone spoke aloud what I had been too ashamed to admit. That night, I walked along the lake, the city lights shimmering on the water. I thought about Rebecca's words, her threats, her pleas, but instead of guilt, I felt clarity. For once, her panic was not my responsibility, and I knew this was only the beginning. Friday morning broke with a soft drizzle that misted the windows of my Zurich apartment. I tied my scarf, brewed coffee, and for a moment stood perfectly still, listening to the silence. No pounding knocks, no shrill phone calls demanding favors, only rain tapping against glass, steady and gentle. It felt like the world had finally adjusted to my absence. But when I switched my phone back on, reality struck. 62 missed calls, 47 new messages. Rebecca and David were relentless. I scrolled through them slowly, watching their words mutate like a storm changing form. The first one still held a veneer of tenderness. Mom, please, we need you. The kids are crying for you. By the 5th day, desperation had hardened into anger. This is ridiculous, Mom. You're ruining our lives over a tantrum. Act like an adult and come back. And finally, the last ones reeked of despair. I've called every hospital, the police, your friends. No one knows where you are. If something happens to you, it will be my fault. Please, just tell me you're okay. Nowhere in the entire cascade of messages was there true remorse. Nowhere did she say, I was cruel, I was wrong, I'm sorry for wishing you dead. Every plea revolved around her suffering, her fear, her losses. I typed one final response. I am perfectly fine, happier than I have been in years. What you are experiencing now are the natural consequences of your actions. Almost instantly, Rebecca replied, Please, Mom, we can fix this. I promise I'll never say something so horrible again. Just come back. I stared at the words until they blurred, then answered with the truth it had taken me decades to learn. Empty promises don't mend broken hearts. The words you spoke revealed what you truly think of me. That truth cannot be taken back. I hit send, then blocked her number, along with David's. For good measure, I blocked the unknown numbers too. My thumb lingered on the screen, trembling slightly, but once the action was complete, a strange calm spread through me. It was over. The lifeline that tethered me to their demands had been cut. That afternoon, I met with Herr Meyer again, this time to sign papers for permanent residency. As I traced my signature across the documents, I felt a surge of something I hadn't known since my youth: autonomy. For the first time, I was living by my own design. That evening, Elvira called from back home. Her voice carried the tremor of excitement. "Julieta, you won't believe it. Rebecca came to me, crying like a child. She begged me to tell her where you were, that it was all a terrible misunderstanding." "And what did you say?" I asked, bracing myself. "I told her the truth," Elvira said firmly. "That what she said to you was unforgivable, that if I were you, I'd have disappeared forever too." A silence stretched between us, filled with a bittersweet satisfaction. Rebecca was finally tasting life without me, and without the financial cushion I had been for decades. When I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat by the window, and whispered aloud, "This is what consequences sound like." Outside, the rain had stopped, and the city lights glittered as though applauding my resolve. For the first time in my 72 years, I didn't feel like a discarded mother. I felt like a woman reborn. The following week unfolded like a strange dream, half liberation, half reckoning. Each morning I woke to a sunrise that painted the Zurich skyline in gold, and each night I went to bed with the sweet ache of freedom settling deeper into my bones. Yet between those bookends, the world I had left behind continued to claw its way toward me. On Tuesday, I received a call from an international number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but curiosity pressed my thumb to the green button. "Mrs. Johnson?" a female voice asked, clipped but polite. "This is Sarah Williams from Family Services in your hometown. I'm reaching out because your daughter, Rebecca Johnson, has filed a complaint about your well-being." My blood ran cold. "A complaint?" "Yes," she continued, her tone clinical. "She alleges you may be suffering from dementia or cognitive decline, and that your recent financial and life decisions put you at risk. She claims you vanished suddenly and are now living abroad in precarious conditions." For a moment, rage and disbelief clashed inside me so violently that I couldn't speak. Rebecca had escalated from cruelty to outright sabotage, trying to paint me as incompetent, unstable, even insane, all to regain access to the wealth and security she had leached from me for years. "Miss Williams," I finally said, my voice steady despite the fury trembling beneath it, "I do not suffer from dementia. I am 72, yes, but my mind is sharp and my decisions are deliberate. I am living in Switzerland by choice, in a comfortable apartment, with excellent medical care available. My daughter's allegations are false." There was a pause. "We will need verification. Would you be willing to undergo a medical and psychological evaluation through the American consulate here in Zurich?" "Of course," I answered without hesitation. "I welcome it." When I hung up, my hands were shaking, but not from fear, from clarity. Rebecca hadn't simply wanted me gone. She wanted to destroy my independence, erase my voice, strip me of the ability to choose for myself, and that was something I would never allow. I immediately phoned my lawyer, Anel. His deep, familiar voice steadied me. "Julieta, I'm glad you called. Rebecca has been busy. She's tried to challenge the changes you made to your will, alleging you weren't of sound mind. She even attempted to access your accounts. But don't worry, we have everything recorded. She has no case." I closed my eyes, letting his words soothe me. Still, my resolve hardened further. "Anel, I want to take this further. Prepare a defamation lawsuit. She tried to tarnish my mental health to regain control of my finances. There must be consequences." His voice warmed with approval. "It would be my pleasure. After everything she's done, perhaps it's time she finally faced accountability." 2 days later, I walked through the heavy doors of the American consulate in Zurich. The examination lasted 3 hours, thorough and exhaustive, with memory tests, problem-solving exercises, and long conversations with the doctor. When it ended, he looked at me with a kind of quiet admiration. "Mrs. Johnson," he said gently, "not only are you in perfect mental health, but your decision to start a new life at this stage shows remarkable clarity and courage. Your daughter's claims will be officially documented as unfounded." Relief washed over me like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For the first time, someone in authority had confirmed what I already knew. I wasn't broken. I wasn't crazy. I was free. That night, I sat by the lake with a journal on my lap and wrote until my hand cramped. I chronicled everything: the years of sacrifice, The cruel birthday, the letter, the escape, the accusations, the tests. Not for Rebecca, she would never understand, but for the countless other mothers who might recognize their own stories in mine. For the first time, my words weren't a plea for love or gratitude. They were a manifesto of survival. And as I closed the notebook, I realized something. I hadn't just left Rebecca behind. I had crossed a line in myself, from victim to author of my own story. The official report from the American consulate arrived on crisp, embossed paper 2 days later. I held it in my hands like a shield. It stated, without hesitation, that I was of sound mind, fully capable of making my own financial and life decisions. Rebecca's accusations had been deemed baseless. That afternoon, Sarah Williams, the social worker, called again. "Mrs. Johnson, the case is officially closed. The report will be filed in our records. Your daughter has been notified that her complaint was unfounded. Be aware, repeated false reports can carry legal consequences for her." "Thank you," I said, the words steadier than I expected. That is all I needed. I set the phone down and exhaled. Rebecca had failed. Her attempt to reduce me to a confused, dependent old woman had not only collapsed, it had backfired. For the first time in decades, she held a record against her name, proof of manipulation written into official files. That night, as I sat by the window overlooking Zurich's cobblestone streets, I made a decision. I would no longer keep my story locked within the walls of memory or the privacy of a letter meant for one ungrateful daughter. Other women needed to hear it, women who had sacrificed themselves until there was nothing left but silence. I pulled my laptop onto my knees and began to type. When a mother's love becomes self-destruction. My story of liberation at 72. The words flowed faster than I could catch them, each keystroke a release. I wrote about the sleepless nights at the hospital, the money I had poured into Rebecca's dreams, the pink dress, the tuition, the wedding, the down payment. I wrote about the cruel words on her birthday, about the cake melting in my trembling hands, about the phone calls where she confirmed she truly wished me gone. But I also wrote about Switzerland, about silk scarves and strong coffee by the lake, about breathing air that belonged only to me, about what it felt like to spend $1 on myself and not feel guilt. 4 hours later, I leaned back, exhausted but exhilarated. 20 pages sat glowing on the screen, part memoir, part warning, part battle cry. I sent it to an online magazine I'd once stumbled upon, one that published stories of women who had remade their lives after 60. A week passed. Then, one morning, I opened my inbox to find a reply. "Julietta, your story is powerful and inspiring. We would be honored to publish it. Would you also be willing to record a video interview for our YouTube channel? We believe your experience could help thousands." I pressed a hand to my chest, stunned. My pain, my humiliation, my loss suddenly carried the weight of purpose. 2 weeks later, I sat in front of a camera in a quiet Zurich studio, speaking my truth with a calm I hadn't known I possessed. I told the world what it meant to give everything and be left with nothing, what it felt like to be wished away by the very child you had built your life around. The interview went live, and within days, it spread like wildfire. Thousands of women left comments, sharing their own stories of sons and daughters who used them, manipulated them, discarded them. I read each comment with tears streaming down my cheeks. I was not alone. I had never been alone. And for the first time in my life, my voice could not be silenced. The interview rippled across the internet far more quickly than I ever imagined. Within a week, the video had tens of thousands of views, and the comment section grew into a chorus of mothers and grandmothers who recognized themselves in my story. My 40-year-old son lives in my house and screams at me when I ask him to contribute rent. My daughter only calls when she needs money for her vacations. When I was in the hospital, she didn't even visit. I thought I was alone, but your story showed me I'm not crazy. Each confession pierced me, but also strengthened me. Pain echoed pain, but in that resonance was recognition, solidarity. I had stepped out of the shadows, and now countless women were stepping with me. Then, one morning, an email appeared in my inbox. The sender's name froze me in place. David, my son-in-law. I opened it cautiously, half expecting accusation, but what I read was different. "Julietta, I watched your interview. I need you to know I agree with you. Rebecca's words were unforgivable, and the way she has treated you all these years is wrong. I saw it, but I didn't have the courage to confront her. We depended too much on your generosity. My breath caught as I read on. The kids miss you. They don't understand why you're gone. Rebecca has told them you're sick and can't visit, but I think they deserve the truth someday. I know it's too late for apologies, but I want you to know I see now how badly we treated you. I hope you've found happiness. I read his words 3 times, my heart torn in 2 directions. On one hand, it was a validation I had craved for years. Someone inside that house, someone who had witnessed it all, finally admitting the truth. On the other hand, it was an apology drenched in too late timing, unable to erase the scars already carved into my heart. I opened a reply window and let my fingers hover over the keys. Then I typed, "David, I appreciate your honesty, but apologies after the fact do not undo years of silence. I hope you will use this realization to become a better husband and father, and to teach your children to value those who love them before it is too late. As for me, I have chosen my own path, and I intend to walk it with dignity." I pressed send and closed my laptop with finality. That night, I sat at a cafe by the lake, watching the lights dance on the water. The scarf around my neck fluttered in the cool breeze, and for once, I felt no weight pulling me backward. David's words had not changed my decision, but they had given me a strange gift, proof that I hadn't imagined it all, proof that my sacrifices had been real, visible, undeniable. The echoes of my past no longer defined me. They had become a lesson, a testament to how far I had come. And as I sipped my wine, I whispered to myself, I am free. 6 months passed, as if they belonged to another life entirely. Switzerland had wrapped me in its calm embrace, mornings spent in German classes, afternoons with watercolors by the lake, evenings filled with new friends who valued me not for what I could give but for who I was. I had begun to breathe differently, each inhale unburdened, each exhale lighter than the last. Then one bright spring morning, as I arranged fresh tulips in a vase, my phone rang. It was Elvira. The tremor in her voice told me before her words did. "Giulietta," she said, almost breathless, "you have to hear this. Rebecca lost the house." I froze. For a long moment the phone grew heavy in my hand, tulips dangling forgotten. "Elvira, what happened?" "The bank foreclosed," she explained. "David couldn't keep a job. They fell behind again. And since you had already initiated your rights as co-signer, the bank moved forward. They're gone from that big house. They've moved into a small apartment across town." I pressed a hand to my chest, my heartbeat loud in the quiet room. Despite everything, despite every cruel word, my first thought was of my grandchildren. "And the twins?" I asked. "They're fine," Elvira assured me. "David finally found steady work at a factory, though it pays far less. Rebecca had to go back to work too. They'll manage. Not comfortably, but they'll manage." A strange wave passed through me, not joy, not sorrow, but something heavier and more complicated. Justice, perhaps. For decades I had been their safety net, the invisible foundation beneath their castle. Now, stripped of that foundation, the castle had crumbled. Elvira's voice softened. "Rebecca came to me yesterday, crying harder than I've ever seen her. She said she finally understands everything she lost when she lost you. She begged me to find you, to tell you she wants to apologize." I closed my eyes, letting the silence stretch. Somewhere inside me, the childlike part still wanted to hear those words. "I'm sorry, Mom." But I also knew too well how quickly her remorse would wither once the sting of consequence faded. "And what did you tell her?" I asked carefully. "I told her some wounds are too deep to heal," Elvira said firmly. "That some words once spoken can never be taken back. And I told her you are thriving in your new life, and it is best for both of you if she lets you be." Tears pricked my eyes, but this time they were not of pain. They were of release. For the first time, someone else had defended me not out of obligation, but because it was the truth. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, I poured myself a glass of champagne and sat on the balcony. Zurich glowed in the twilight, a city of rebirth. I thought of Rebecca's tears, of the house lost, of the children adjusting to a smaller home. I did not feel vindictive. I felt free. For once, the consequences were not mine to bear. They belonged to her. Just a week after Elvira's call, my lawyer Annelle rang me from across the ocean. his tone alive with news. "Julieta," he said, "you might want to sit down for this. The bank has finalized the foreclosure and the resale of Rebecca's house. Because you were the co-signer and had covered their late payments, you are entitled to recover your initial contribution plus accrued interest." My pulse quickened. "How much are we talking about, Annelle?" $185,000. The bank has already approved the transfer. The funds will arrive in your Swiss account next week. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like the years of sacrifice I thought had been buried were rising from the grave, transformed into something I could finally claim for myself. "And there's more," Annelle continued. "Your apartment back home has sold as well. After fees and expenses, you'll net $95,000. I did the math in my head, almost afraid to trust it. Together, nearly $300,000 money I had written off as gone forever, poured into a daughter's ungrateful hands. And now, like a tide turning, it was flowing back to me. When the transfer cleared, my total savings and investments exceeded $500,000. $500,000 at 72 years old. I was richer than I had ever been in my entire life. That night, I celebrated at my favorite restaurant by the lake. I ordered champagne without even looking at the price and toasted the reflection of a woman I barely recognized. Not the broken mother whose daughter had wished her dead, but a woman who had found the courage to begin again. Between sips, I thought of every check I had once written with trembling hands. The prom dress, the tuition, the down payment, the braces, the gifts. I had believed those dollars were gone forever, spent in the name of love. Yet now, by some twist of fate, life had returned them to me this time without strings, without manipulation, without the crushing weight of obligation. The next morning, I woke to birdsong drifting through the window and an idea that made me sit up straighter in bed. For years, I had lived as though my voice didn't matter, my sacrifices unspoken, my story unseen. But now, with freedom in my bank account and peace in my heart, I realized I wanted more than survival. I wanted to tell the world what I had learned, that a mother's love is not an endless resource to be drained, that dignity matters more than duty, and that it is never too late to start again. I called a Swiss publisher that specialized in memoirs and self-help. The editor, a warm woman named Brigitte, listened intently as I told her my story. When I finished, there was silence on the line, then a breathless response. "Julieta, your story touches on something millions of women suffer in silence. If you are willing, this could be a book, a guide, a beacon." And so, with trembling excitement, I agreed. I had once lost everything to my daughter's words. Now, I was about to turn that loss into a legacy. The weeks that followed were unlike any I had known in my 72 years. Each morning, I carried my laptop to the small desk by the window of my Zurich apartment, opened it, and poured myself onto the screen. The words came like a storm at first, furious and unstoppable. I wrote about the years of double shifts in the hospital, the calluses on my hands, the lonely dinners eaten over charts while Rebecca slept at home. I wrote about the pink prom dress, the $35,000 wedding, the mortgage payments slipped from my pension. Every sacrifice, every receipt, every dollar became a line in the story I had denied myself for too long. But slowly, the writing shifted. It was no longer only about what I had lost, it was about what I had found. The first sip of champagne by the lake, the thrill of buying a scarf simply because it was beautiful, the way the mountains stood like guardians outside my window, reminding me daily that freedom, once chosen, does not need permission. I titled the book When Love Hurts, Freeing Yourself from Family Emotional Abuse After 70. It wasn't only my memoir, it was a roadmap. Each chapter carried not only my story, but guidance for other women trapped in the same invisible cages. How to recognize manipulation disguised as love. How to set boundaries without drowning in guilt. How to choose dignity over endless sacrifice. For 3 months, I lived inside that manuscript. My days were filled with words, my nights with dreams of women reading them and finding the courage to change. When I finally sent the draft to Brigitte, the editor, my hands trembled not with fear, but with anticipation. Her response came swiftly. "Julieta, this book is extraordinary. It will save lives, marriages, mothers. We must publish it immediately." The publishing process moved quickly, and 8 months later, I held the finished book in my hands. A glossy cover, my name printed clearly across the front. I traced the letters with my fingers, astonished. For decades I had been invisible, known only as Mom, the one who gave, the one who sacrificed. Now I had a voice, bound and printed, undeniable. The release exceeded every expectation. The book climbed bestseller lists across Europe. Letters poured in from Spain, Mexico, Argentina, the United States. Women wrote to me saying they had walked away from toxic children, had sold houses that chained them, had chosen peace over pain. Your story helped me understand that true love doesn't demand self-destruction, wrote Carmen from Mexico. For the first time in years, I sleep peacefully, knowing I am allowed to choose myself, shared Rosa from Argentina. One letter, however, moved me most of all. It came from a young mother in her 30s named Andrea. Mrs. Johnson, after reading your book, I realized I was treating my own mother exactly as your daughter treated you. I was repeating the cycle without seeing it. Yesterday, I apologized to my mother for years of taking her for granted. I told her I want to help her fulfill her own dreams. Thank you for opening my eyes before it was too late. When I finished reading, tears streamed down my cheeks. My pain had not been wasted. It had become a bridge for others, a warning, a lantern. For the first time, I felt not just free but purposeful. 2 years had slipped quietly into the past. Zurich was no longer new, it was home. My mornings were filled with familiar rituals, strong coffee, German classes, watercolor sessions, and long walks along the lake, where I could hear the church bells ripple across the water. My life had taken a shape I had once thought impossible, calm, dignified, and mine alone. Then one spring afternoon, as I sorted through the day's post, I noticed an envelope with handwriting that tugged at my heart before I even read the names. The letters were round and uneven, the kind that still carried the wobble of childhood. My hand shook as I opened it. Dear Grandma Julieta, Dad told us the truth. He said Mom said some very ugly things to you, and that's why you left. We just want you to know that we miss you so much. We are proud of you for being brave. When we are older, we would like to visit you in Switzerland, if you want us to. We love you, Grandma. It was signed by both twins, now 12, with colorful drawings scrawled at the bottom, one of me standing with mountains behind, another of a smiling sun over a lake. Their childish handwriting wavered across the page, but their message was steady. They still loved me. I pressed the paper to my chest and wept not with bitterness, but with something gentler, bittersweet. All the sacrifices, all the pain, all the severed ties, and still, love had found its way through, carried by the innocence of 2 children. That evening, I sat at my desk with fresh stationery and began to write back. My dearest grandchildren, your letter is the most beautiful gift I have received in years. I love you deeply and always will, no matter the distance. When you are old enough to make your own choices, the doors of my home and my heart will always be open for you. Until then, know that your grandma is living a full and happy life surrounded by beauty and peace. Please remember this. Words have power. They can build or destroy, heal or wound. Never forget that respect is the foundation of love. Carry that truth with you, always. I signed it with all the love I had left in me, folded the letter carefully, and placed it in the envelope. As I sealed it, I felt something I hadn't in a very long time. Hope. Hope that the next generation might break free from the chains of cruelty and entitlement. Hope that my story, once drenched in sorrow, might yet ripple into something better for them. That night, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city lights of Zurich, the letter ready to post, and whispered into the cool air, maybe this is what rebirth really means. Not only saving yourself, but planting seeds for those who come after. 3 years had passed since that birthday that tore my world apart. I was 75 now, and as I sat on my balcony in Zurich, the evening sun turning the Alps into gold, I let myself breathe in the peace I had fought so hard to claim. I looked around me, not at grandeur, not at riches, but at a life that was mine. A modest apartment, a shelf lined with books I had chosen, a watercolor easel splattered with colors of my own making. Friends who called me Julieta, not, Mom, can you do this? A calendar filled with activities I wanted, not obligations imposed. My accounts showed more than $600,000 in assets. My book, When Love Hurts, had sold across countries I'd never set foot in. Letters arrived weekly from women who told me I had saved them, or at least given them permission to save themselves. My inbox was no longer filled with Rebecca's desperate manipulations, but with gratitude from strangers who had become sisters in survival. As for Rebecca, she had vanished from my daily life. The last I heard through Elvira was that she lived in a modest apartment across town, working again, struggling but alive. Perhaps she had softened, perhaps not. It no longer mattered. I had stopped measuring my worth by her choices. The twins, though, still glowed in my heart. Their letter, tucked safely in my desk, remained a reminder that not all bridges had burned. One day, when they were older, they might knock on my door in Zurich. When that day came, they would find me waiting not the broken woman their mother once crushed, but the grandmother who had chosen dignity. As the evening air cooled, I poured myself a glass of wine and let the words form in my mind, a summation of everything I had lived. Rebecca had asked me, as a birthday gift, to disappear, and I had granted her that wish, but not in the way she imagined. I disappeared from her life, yes, but in that disappearance I was reborn. She lost her safety net, her provider, the invisible scaffold that held up her world, and I found myself. I smiled, lifting the glass in a silent toast to the mountains. Sometimes, the only way to save yourself is to let the old self die, to vanish from the role others chained you to, and to re-emerge as the person you were always meant to be. That birthday had been my ending. Zurich was my beginning. And for the first time in 75 years, I was finally, completely, unapologetically alive.